She didn't know the man she was about to destroy in court was the same boy who once held her hand through the worst night of her life. He didn't know the brilliant lawyer fighting to dismantle his empire was the girl he'd spent 7 years trying to forget. But the moment their eyes met across that Lagos courtroom, the world stopped. And everything they'd buried came rushing back. Lagos, Nigeria. 7 years ago. The rain came down in sheets the night Zara Eze decided to quit law school. She was sitting on the floor of the university library, her casebook soaked with tears she refused to acknowledge, surrounded by notes she'd stopped being able to read 2 hours ago. She was 22. She was brilliant. Everyone said so. Her mother said so. Her professors said so. The scholarship committee that had funded her entire education said so. None of that mattered when the letter arrived. Her father had been arrested. Fraud. Embezzlement. The company he'd run for 30 years had been hollowed out from the inside, and his name was at the center of the scandal. The newspaper headline was already circulating across the country: Eze Property CEO detained, prominent Lagos family in disgrace. Zara had read it 12 times. She was still reading it when a voice broke through the static. "You're holding your phone upside down." She looked up. A young man stood in the doorway of the reference section, shaking rain off a black umbrella that had clearly failed its one job. He was tall, angular, wearing a university visitor's lanyard and a look of polite concern that didn't quite mask his own exhaustion. His Korean features were sharp in the low library light. He didn't belong here, that much was obvious. International exchange student, her lawyer's brain cataloged automatically. Probably lost. "I know how to hold a phone," she said flatly. "I'm sure you do." He pulled a chair out from the nearest table and sat down across from her without being invited, setting his umbrella carefully against the shelf. "I'm not going to ask if you're okay because you're clearly not okay, and you don't look like someone who enjoys dishonest questions." Zara stared at him. "Who are you?" "Seo Minjun." He extended a hand. "Architecture exchange program. I've been lost in this library for 45 minutes and I'm starting to think it's haunted." She didn't shake his hand. "It's not haunted. It's just badly designed." "That's somehow worse." He leaned his elbows on the table. "You want to talk about whatever that is?" He nodded toward her phone. Not pressing. Just offering. She didn't know why she answered. Maybe because he was a stranger. Maybe because it was almost midnight and there was no one else in the world she could call. Maybe because something in the careful steadiness of his gaze made her feel like he could hold weight without buckling. "My father is in prison," she said. "And tomorrow, the whole country will know." Minjun was quiet for a moment. "Then, what are you going to do?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." He said it quietly but with certainty. Like he could see something in her she couldn't see herself. People who don't know what to do don't sit in libraries at midnight surrounded by case notes. You're already building your defense. Zara looked down at the papers around her. He was right. She hadn't even realized it. She didn't get his number that night. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer. They just talked for 4 hours, through the rain, about law and architecture and the specific weight of being the child expected to carry a family name. At dawn, they walked out of the library in opposite directions. She turned back once. He was already gone. She never forgot him. But she told herself she had. 7 years changes a person. Zara Eze was 30 now, and she wore her reputation like armor. Lead litigation attorney at Pinnacle Legal Associates, the firm the Lagos elite called when they needed someone brilliant, relentless, and completely unmoved by money or intimidation. She'd spent the last 4 years dismantling corporations that preyed on ordinary people. She'd won cases that no one thought were winnable. She'd become, in certain circles, something close to legend. She'd also spent the last 4 years making sure her father's name was cleared. The real culprit behind the Eze Properties collapse had been buried under layers of shell companies and forged signatures. Zara had followed the trail for years, through Abuja, through London, through 3 different jurisdictions, and it had led her, finally, to a name. Seo Holdings West Africa. A Korean conglomerate's regional subsidiary, currently expanding its Lagos real estate portfolio, currently worth 4 billion naira, and currently, according to her newly acquired evidence, built on the same falsified land titles that had destroyed her family. She didn't know who ran it. She hadn't looked at the CEO's profile. She'd been too focused on the evidence, on the case, on the quiet satisfaction of knowing that after 7 years, justice was finally within reach. Her first mistake was walking into that courtroom without looking. The hearing was a preliminary motion, standard procedural, the kind Zara had handled 100 times. She entered the courtroom in full command, briefcase in hand, her team flanking her, her argument already mapped to perfection. The opposing legal team was already seated. She looked up, and the world fell out from under her feet. He was older. The softness of his student years had been replaced by something carved and precise, a jawline that could anchor a boardroom, a stillness that came from years of being the most powerful person in any room. His suit was understated and impossibly expensive. His eyes were fixed on the judge. Then they moved to her. The recognition was instantaneous. She watched it happen, the slight parting of his lips, the almost imperceptible tightening of his hand around the pen he was holding, the way he held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds before he looked away. 2 seconds. Controlled and deliberate. Like he'd already prepared for this. Zara's heart was screaming. Her face showed nothing. "Counsel, are you ready to proceed?" the judge asked. "Yes, Your Honor," Zara said. Her voice was perfectly steady. "The plaintiff is absolutely ready." Seo Minjun, CEO of Seo Holdings West Africa, looked at the table. He didn't speak. But she saw something in his expression that she hadn't expected. It wasn't anger. It wasn't denial. It looked like grief. The motion was adjourned after 2 hours. Procedural delays, scheduling conflicts, the machinery of law grinding slowly, as it always did. Zara was gathering her files when she felt him before she heard him. "Counselor Eze." She didn't turn around immediately. She gave herself 3 full seconds. Then she turned. Up close, he was too much. Too familiar and too foreign all at once. The library was 7 years ago and felt like yesterday. She could still remember the sound of rain against the windows, the way he'd said people who don't know what to do don't sit in libraries at midnight, and how right he'd been. "Mr. Seo," she said. "Professional. Glacial. Any communication between parties should go through counsel. We're not communicating as parties right now." His voice was low and careful, like he was walking on ice he'd checked, but didn't entirely trust. "We're communicating," as he paused. "I don't know what we are." "We are opposing parties in a fraud case," she said crisply. "That's what we are." "Zara." She almost flinched. The way he said her name, like it mattered, like it had always mattered, was almost unbearable. "Don't," she said quietly. "I need you to know. I know everything I need to know." She picked up her briefcase. "You built your regional expansion on land titles that destroyed my family. The evidence is comprehensive and irrefutable. Whatever happened between us in a library 7 years ago, that's gone. That person is gone." She finally looked at him fully, meeting his gaze. "And I am going to take this case apart piece by piece until the truth is so undeniable that even your legal team can't obscure it." She walked away. She made it to the hallway before she had to stop and press her back against the wall and breathe. In the courtroom behind her, Minjun sat very still. Around him, his legal team murmured about strategy and timelines. He heard none of it. He was thinking about a library. About rain. About a woman who'd been quietly building her defense even while she was breaking. He'd spent 7 years wondering if he'd imagined the feeling of that night. The electric clarity of it, the sense that something rare and unrepeatable had just walked into his life and out of it in the same breath. He hadn't imagined it. And now she was going to destroy him. The worst part, the part he couldn't say to anyone, was that a piece of him was glad. The next 6 weeks were war. Zara worked 18-hour days. Her team compiled testimonies, traced wire transfers, reconstructed contracts that had been deliberately obscured. She was methodical and merciless, and every night when she went home to her flat in Victoria Island, she told herself that was enough. That purpose was enough. That justice was enough. She didn't think about the way he'd looked at her in the courtroom. She didn't. Then her lead investigator put a file on her desk and said, simply, "You need to read this." She read it. And her entire case fractured. The file was an internal audit commissioned 7 months ago, before the lawsuit, before Zara had found her evidence. It had been ordered by Minjun himself. The audit had uncovered the falsified land titles. It named the architect of the scheme, not Seo Holdings, but a regional partner company, a Nigerian intermediary that had forged the documentation, presented it to Seo Holdings as legitimate, and pocketed the difference. The intermediary's records traced back to a name Zara recognized. She sat with the file for a very long time. The name was Bankole Adeyemi, her father's former business partner. The man who had testified against her father in the original investigation. The man who had walked free. Minjun had known. He'd found the fraud, ordered the internal audit, and then, she kept reading, he'd contacted the Nigerian Economic and Financial Crimes Commission 3 months ago. Before the lawsuit, he'd already been trying to report it. Her investigator cleared his throat. There's a note at the back. She turned to it. Handwritten in Korean, with a translation her investigator had attached. It said, "If any families were harmed by this, I want to know their names." Zara closed the file. She pressed her hands flat on her desk. She looked at the ceiling. She had been so certain. She had been so certain that certainty was a form of justice. That if she was precise enough, relentless enough, righteous enough, she couldn't be wrong. She picked up her phone and called someone she hadn't spoken to in 4 years. "Dad," she said when he answered. "I need you to tell me everything you remember about Bankole Adeyemi." She requested the meeting. That mattered to her, that she be the one to ask. They met at a neutral location, a rooftop restaurant in Ikoyi, empty mid-afternoon, Lagos spreading out below them in every direction like a living map. She was there first. She stood at the railing looking out at the city when she heard his footsteps. She turned. He looked tired, she realized. Not defeated, but tired in the way of someone who'd been carrying something heavy and was just now allowing themselves to show it. "I read your audit," she said. He was quiet. "I read the EFCC filing. I read the note." She faced him fully. "You were trying to expose this before I ever filed suit." "Yes. Why didn't you reach out? When you found the Eze family name in the records, why didn't you contact?" "I didn't know it was you." His voice was even, but something underneath it wasn't. "I found the name in the records 7 weeks ago. I was still tracing the victims when your lawsuit was filed." A pause. "When I walked into that courtroom and saw you, Zara, I understood immediately what had happened. You'd found the same thread I had, but from the other direction. And you said nothing. You didn't give me room to say anything. That was fair." She looked away, out at the city. "You should have tried harder." "Maybe." He moved to stand beside her at the railing. Not close enough to touch. Just beside her. "I also thought you deserved to find the truth yourself. You'd been building toward it for years. I didn't want to take that from you." She was quiet for a long moment. The city hummed below them. Somewhere, a muezzin called. "My father is going to be exonerated," she said. "Adeyemi's records are enough. The EFCC is reopening the original investigation." "I know. My lawyers spoke with them this morning. The suit against Seo Holdings will be withdrawn." She turned to look at him. "I'm sorry. For the assumption." For this she stopped. Started again. "I spent 7 years certain I knew the shape of what had happened. I was wrong." Minjun looked at her for a long moment. "You were right about everything except who was responsible." "That's not a small exception." "No," he agreed. "It's not." A different kind of silence settled between them. Heavier. Older. It carried the weight of a library at midnight, of rain on windows, of 2 people who'd walked into each other's lives and then out again. "The library," she said finally. "You remembered." "I remembered everything." His voice was so quiet, she almost didn't hear it over the city. "I looked for you afterward. I didn't have your name. I had a law school library and a scholarship student whose father was in the news, and I searched for months before my exchange program ended and I went back to Seoul. You looked for me." "I've been looking for you," he said, in some form, ever since. The silence this time was different again. Softer around the edges. "That's very inconvenient," Zara said. "Given everything." "I'm aware. It doesn't change what's complicated." "No," he said. but it changes what's possible. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time without the case between them like a wall. He looked back. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know. And I'm not easy. I've never been easy. I remember." Something moved across his face, the ghost of a smile. "You were also not easy to help and completely unwilling to accept that you needed help and absolutely, obviously building your defense even when you thought you were falling apart." "That's not," she stopped. "That's entirely accurate." "I know," he said. "I paid attention." Act 6, The Long Way Home. It wasn't easy. They didn't pretend it was. The exoneration of her father took 4 months. Bankole Adeyemi's web of fraud unraveled methodically under joint pressure from the EFCC, Seo Holdings' legal cooperation, and Zara's relentless documentation. When the ruling came, she stood in the courtroom and felt something she hadn't felt since she was 22 years old on a library floor. She felt it break open. All of it, the rage and the grief and the long years of certainty she'd weaponized because it was the only thing she'd had left. Her father wept. She didn't. She held his hand and stood very straight and watched justice move slowly, correctly, finally into place. Minjun was not in the courtroom. She hadn't asked him to be. But when she walked out into the afternoon sun, blinking against the brightness, he was across the street. Just standing there. Not approaching. Just present. In case. She crossed the street. "You didn't have to be here," she said. "I know. Did you think I'd collapse?" "No." He looked at her with that quiet certainty she'd first encountered in a library doorway. "I thought you might want someone to celebrate with. Or someone to not celebrate with if you needed that instead." Zara looked at him for a long time. "My father wants to meet you," she said finally. "He's been asking since I told him about the audit. He says any man who looks for the truth when it's inconvenient deserves to share a meal." Minjun's expression shifted. Something careful and hopeful at once. "He knows about me? I told him about a stranger in a library years ago." She allowed the corner of her mouth to curve, just slightly. "He's been asking about that stranger ever since." "What did you tell him about him?" "That he was irritating and presumptuous and sat down without being invited." "That's fair." "And that he was right," she said. "About everything that mattered." She held out her hand. Not a handshake. Just a hand. An offering. A beginning. He took it. They walked into the Lagos afternoon together. The city was loud and golden and enormous around them. It didn't care about them at all, which was somehow exactly right, because they'd stopped needing the world to witness what they were building. They'd stopped needing anything to validate it. It simply was. The way rare things are. The opening was her father's idea. East Seo Community Legal Center, the name they'd argued about for 3 weeks until they landed on something that neither of them had suggested and both of them immediately knew was right. It occupied a building in Surulere that had once been a warehouse, redesigned by a Korean architectural firm in close collaboration with its new tenants into something that was both utterly functional and quietly beautiful. Clean lines and warm wood. Airy consultation rooms. A library stocked with legal texts that any member of the community could access for free. Minjun had designed the library himself. Zara stood in the center of it on opening day, watching families move through the space. Watching a young woman about 22 or 23 sit down at one of the long tables with a stack of papers and a look of exhausted determination that Zara recognized bone deep. She crossed the room. "Can I help you find something?" The young woman looked up. "I'm trying to understand land title law," she said. "I think my family's property rights have been violated, but I don't know where to start." "Then you're in the right place," Zara said and sat down. Across the room, she felt Minjun watching her. She didn't look up, she already knew his expression. The one that said, "I told you so," without any words, because he'd told her months ago that the center would become exactly this. A place for people like she had been, lost and brilliant and building defenses they didn't yet know they had. She'd argued with him about the logistics. She'd been wrong. He'd had the grace not to mention it too often. Later, after the guests had left and the staff had begun to close up, they sat on the steps outside in the cooling evening air, Lagos murmuring around them. 7 years, he said. "Don't be sentimental." "I'm allowed to be sentimental about 7 years." Zara leaned her head against his shoulder. You're allowed about 40 seconds. 40 seconds is enough. He pressed his cheek against her hair. I thought about that night for years. I thought about a woman who was falling apart and also completely in control. I thought about what it must be like to be that certain of yourself even in grief. I wasn't certain. I was pretending. I know. That's what made it extraordinary. She was quiet for a moment. The city breathed around them. What did you think when you saw me in the courtroom? He thought about it. I thought, of course. Of course it's her. A pause. And then I thought, she's going to be impossible. You were right about that. I usually am. 30 seconds, she said. You had 30 seconds left and you just wasted it. He laughed low and warm and real and pulled her closer. Above them, the Lego sky was turning the color of embers. The stars were beginning to arrive, one by one, into the space where the light was leaving. They sat in the silence between them, not the silence of absence, not the silence of loss, but the kind of silence that only two people who know each other can build together. The kind of silence that is its own language. The silence between stars. Full and alive and illuminating everything it touched. Do you agree that these two will make a great couple? Drop your answer in the comments below. Like, subscribe, share, more stories are coming. Thank you for watching.